Hello and welcome to this digital discussion we are having at ORF with Velina Tchakarova. She is a security policy expert at the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. She is well known in her area of work and her commentary carries weight. We thought we would have a quick discussion with her to try and put some perspective on the terrible attacks that happened in Vienna. Terrorists attacked six various spots in Vienna simultaneously. This was preceded by two terrible attacks in France and all of Europe. Today's news, the latest news is that Britain has upped its security alert to the highest. Other European countries are worried and concerned, and rightly so. And across Europe, leaders have come forward to condemn the attacks. But we need to look beyond just sheer condemnation or the promises of acting and cracking down on radical Islamism. What we need to do is realize that the world has a problem, and right now Europe has a problem. So, Velina, would you like to share your thoughts on how this is going to play out in the coming days?
Thank you for having me, and it's a really very sensitive issue. It's also one that will going to shape the agenda of the European political elites for sure. And it is, when it comes to Vienna, when it comes to Austria, by far the hardest day in many, many years. It was by far the worst terrorist attack in Austria. And it was also until this terrorist attack was conducted, was more or less the perception among the Austrian society that Austria is a sort of an island of the blessed, that it would be spared, and it has been in fact spared from this kind of gruesome terrorist attacks, like the ones you mentioned in France or in United Kingdom or in Belgium in the past. And clearly now the political elites are going to put the issue of tackling radicalization on the political agenda. Even though that it was announced that the perpetrators' motives were, were linked to the ISIS and was this gruesome terrorist attack was conducted due to the participation in the U.S. led coalition against ISIS. I think that the motives should be seen more in a European context. As you mentioned, there were already several terrorist attacks conducted recently and were linked more or less with certain statements by the French President Macron, who is now, trying to deal with the issue of radicalization and the issue of political Islam. And now this is certainly one topic where he will find an ally in the face of the Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz.
Yeah, but
one important issue.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but all this is fine. We have gone through this earlier too. When France was attacked, and then there was a series of attacks across Central Europe. And even then we heard the same statements, the same concern. But there doesn't seem to be any concerted effort to tackle radical Islamism, or what you call political Islam, or the radicalization of Muslims who are living in Europe. Where does one begin? Because this is important. I mean, this is important in the sense that if Europe is seen to be wavering, then the situation elsewhere in the world also becomes tough.
Now, where does it begin and where will it end is very, very difficult to say at this point. What is clear is that there is a distinct, really difference, which political elites made very clear in their statements between the Islam as a religion and the political Islam as a dangerous ideology, which actually is being used for this radicalization, specifically in among the younger members of the communities. And this is what is going to be addressed. It's going to be addressed the political Islam, not the Islam as a religion. And I think that one very serious issue is going to be about the so-called European way of life, which of course encompasses the understanding of the European values, of European norms and European freedoms and liberties, and this is not always, of course, in accordance with the understanding of other minorities. But what is important is to understand that one way how the political elites see the whole issue is that there must be a very clear distinguishing, clear difference between both issues, because majority of Muslim societies in Europe are actually, in fact, specifically the next generations are in fact integrated to a great extent and actually share a great part of this so-called European living. And even during this terrorist attack in Vienna, just to make a final point, even during this terrorist attack in Vienna, it was actually two migrants of Turkish origin who came to help and saved actually the policeman.
That brings me to the linked questions, three linked questions. The first one, you mentioned about European values and European sense of liberty, democracy, openness, plurality, and enlightenment. But clearly there is a conflict between what Europe thinks and believes in and what those who would like to live by a certain separate set of precepts, what they think and believe in. Now, reconciling them is not an easy task, agreed. But how do you deal with this relentless flooding of Europe with migrants, quote unquote, who come, and then Europe has taken a conscious decision to open its doors to them. And this is one of, as you pointed out, that they were migrants, I mean, who carried out the attacks in Vienna and also in Paris. But how do you deal with it? Because does this, from a security perspective, does this call for reviewing Europe's migrants policy? Does it call for being more strict, put in more filters? And lastly, I will come to that later because we also need to discuss Turkey. I mean, this is something which nobody wants to talk about. But let us start with the migrants issue.
Well, these are, of course, very tough questions. It was very obvious that following the migration crisis in 2015, the views were very, very split within the European capitals. And the Austrian government during that time also welcomed migrants, but on the other side developed more conservative view as to how to tackle the issue in the future. Coalitions within the European Union were built in terms of, more openness, being more open towards future migration flows, or being more conservative in that matter. And the Austrian Chancellor, which is the Chancellor also now with this government, has had a very, very clear position on that matter, that the European Union, the institutions, together with the member states, should develop a more coherent approach. But the views are, like I said, still very much split. Migration will be certainly an issue which will shape the security policy agenda of Europe for in the next years, but also in the next decades, due to very objective conditions. If you look at the map, the whole direct European neighborhood to the south and increasingly to the east is determined by conflicts and by military tensions. Take the climate issue, add the climate issue to this reality, and you will see clearly that there is going to be further flows from that directions. Now, like I said, there are already certain efforts as to how to tackle it, but this is all very short-oriented, and the problem is, and this is something that our viewers have to understand when they look at Europe, no politician can win elections if if there is a very, very conservative opinion towards these issues. So more of the European societies were very much welcoming when it came to this migration crisis, when it came to welcoming all these people. But on the other side, when it comes to the political aspects, like I said, due to the fact that the democratic process determines, more or less short-term oriented agendas, no politician will take such issue and will tackle such issue in a long term, beyond the 4 years time frame. And that's certainly one problem. That means also that probably the European institutions will have to take the lead and will actually try to, impose some sort of long-term vision.
So will we reach a situation, because if it's going to become politics of exigency, politics of succumbing to various kinds of what we refer to as vote banks, but essentially it's identity politics. If that comes to prevail, will we then see a situation arise where Europe will be willing to compromise on the European values, sense of liberty, free speech, democracy, openness, plurality, everything for which Europe is known and stands for till now?
Well, following these terror attacks, the counter effect was actually achieved. Now societies are sensitized. The opposite is emerging. In fact, now political leaders are taking a very hard stance. The French President Macron initiated the process of at least, offering an open debate about it, stating his own views, and then initiating, of course, a debate which, was perceived differently in different parts of the society. But anyway, the debate is there, and now Chancellor Sebastian Kurz will certainly join him in defending, so to say, the European way of life, defending the European values, and the European understanding, if you like, of open society, of rule of law, democracy, liberal economy. I think that they're going to find other allies in the spectrum of political elites here in Europe, based on what has happened in the last months. And if we look at the polls, if we look at actually how perceptions are, if you look at the existing perceptions within the societies in Europe, most European countries show clearly that the issue of terrorism is put very, very high on the agenda in terms of perceptions once again. Society actually wants that political elites do more in terms of tackling the issue of terrorism. And like I said, the main understanding is that we should not allow that a very minor group of people within the European societies determine this agenda, divides the society, because in reality it's all about, this is the main understanding, it's all about creating a dividing line between certain religious groups and between certain understanding of these religious groups. That's the political agenda. By creating these dividing lines, then there is no bridge of understanding between them. And this is something that the political elites will actually try to address by minimizing these dividing lines. And like I said, one very important issue is to understand this is not a coherent group. We are dealing with various terror-oriented networks. They are not coming from one specific place or from one specific religious understanding. They have actually different agendas. And that's probably the good news, that they are not coherent in their approach, and it can be tackled in a better way. Now, another issue you mentioned is, of course, the relations with Turkey, and that is something very, very, sensitive at the moment, because in reality, the agenda between Turkey and France, for instance, because it started also with these tensions between the French President Macron and Erdogan, is that is much bigger than this particular issue. And what I mean is that the geopolitical conflict between them.
Turkey has been openly making extremely hostile statements on Europe, that if you don't do this, I will flood you. If you don't do this, I will make it impossible for people to walk freely in the streets of Europe. I'm just quoting all that has emanated. In Vienna's case, in Austria's case, there is a history to it. We know of the siege of Vienna, when Ottoman forces tried to occupy the city, and a much smaller force repelled the siege of Vienna, and that is how history unfolded. Now, once again, what an effort seems to be underway when Erdogan tries to create or recreate the efforts of the Ottoman Empire to conquer Europe. And this is a real thing. I mean, this is not an imagined fear. So why is Europe so circumspect about taking on Erdogan and telling him where he gets off?
And once again, I want to underline that none of these terrorist attacks that have happened recently were motivated by the statements of Erdogan. So let's be very objective about it. On the other side, like you say, of course, these kind of statements create an atmosphere which gives certain ground, fertile soil, let's say, for these radicalized elements, okay? But once again, there is, of course, the problem of radicalized elements in the European society. This is nothing new. During the emergence of ISIS, in Syria and Iraq, there were, in fact, citizens from many European countries, including Austria, who left for Syria or for Iraq to fight with ISIS. Some of these fighters managed to come back. So it's a challenge also, of course, for our judicial systems. It's a challenge also for our political systems how to deal with this issue. So some of them have returned. Austria has around 320 fighters who managed to come back because they are Austrian citizens. And once again, this is only one part of the problem. The bigger part of the problem is because this is not, they do not reflect the only ideology within the political Islam. And this is what I want to point out. The bigger problem is how, and you mentioned it, how to tackle the issue and the security implications of the issue in the long term. One major problem I mentioned is that political decision makers in Europe have to run for elections. Each 4 years they have very short-term oriented agenda. And this is a long-term oriented security issue that needs a very coherent approach and needs actually a strategic vision. Now, one approach, for instance, by Austria, is to start monitoring and collecting data, documenting and activities of religiously motivated political extremism. This is one, for instance, approach that is now already in place. So the judicial system probably will undergo a certain sort of reforms, because we witnessed also with the perpetrator, who is, by the way, Austrian citizen, who conducted this terrorist attack, that he also managed to outsmart the judicial system. And this is, for instance, something that is due to the political decision makers to do. Now, whether this is going to happen in the short term, I doubt it, but certainly what I expect is at least a political dialogue. There will be an agenda being put also at the summits of the European Union. That means that all member states, which are now 27, are going to deal with the issue of political Islam. They have to come up with a coherent approach and with a coherent response, because now we have certainly two political leaders, with Macron and with Kurz, who are going to shape this agenda and who are going to do it in a very coordinated way.
Thank you so much for sharing your views with us, Velina. I wish we could continue. This is a conversation which can continue and go on and on and on. Unfortunately, we are constrained for time. But once again, thank you for joining us and sharing your views with us. And I really hope that Europe comes up with a security strategy, a political strategy, and also a larger strategy of dealing with radicalism, the forces that radicalize people. And lastly, I would say that I think all of the free world would like to see the European way of life, the European beliefs in freedom, in liberty, in egalitarianism, in openness remain untouched by emerging challenges, especially the challenge from radical Islam and Islamism. Thank you once again.
Thank you for having me, and stay safe and sound.
You too.
Thank you.